Okay. Good evening. This is pretty exciting. We're going to have to close the doors and keep them out. We've got such an attendance. But we're all excited because we have local boy, I guess, made good. And we have Stanley Ely, our author, who Nancy Lubar, our program chairman of the Dallas Jewish Historical Society, will introduce to you. I want to say a few things. As president, you have the right to ask people to buy. So I'm selling. He's selling the book, and that will be their story. But those of you that have already bought it, if we missed you, your bonus is you get an extra beautiful postcard, okay, as your bookmark. We would love for those of you, let's see how many of you belong to the Dallas Jewish Historical Society. Well, very nice. Now, we won't shun the others of you, but we'll be really, really fond of you if you will join tonight, because you are benefiting from our free programs, and we need to keep this organization going. Why? Because the Dallas Jewish Historical Society preserves, let's say, collects, preserves, and categorizes Jewish history in Dallas. We have many facets of our organization. When you join, you not only have that postcard, envelope, I don't see our brochure, but we have a brochure that tells you how we have exhibits. Jane Guzman put up a very nice exhibit of Stanley's book and some of his publicity. When you go back, before you get to the hall, right where the library is, if you look to the right, the windows there's a nice display. We also have a website. This is free to you, member or non-member, thanks to Mary Buckleman, who keeps it up on the web. We have a Dallas Jewish Historical website. All sorts of goodies. I didn't bring the note cards, but we have note cards that you can buy, reduced from $1 to 2 for $1, and they have a picture of the Friedman drugstore from, I don't know, way back in the olden days. And they're back there, lovely for cards to use to write a message for Hanukkah or get well or whatever. We also do take contributions, donations, which we will use as a get well, as a bar mitzvah, congratulations, wedding, whatever, and send a notice to the person that's receiving it. We're very versatile. I think I did that. And we have our programs. This is the third program. The first was Sherry Lander doing synagogue tours. This, can't read upside down. And the second, now you can, now you're on your heads. And the second was the co-sponsor with the JCC, the book fair where we sponsored Thomas Cahill. You notice that was $12. You notice that our programs are all free. So we need you to support us monetarily, not just physically. The next one is now. The next will be Memories of Forest High School. I see some of those people here. And Francis Wolf Garber, Doc Miller, Dr. Thurman Ray, and Dr. Paul Michelson will talk about those memories. And we hope you'll share yours. The next is Sisters in Sorrow, the book Voices of Care in the Holocaust, co-authored by local Diane Plotkin, professor at Brookhaven Community College, and she's going to discuss the role of Jewish women in concentration camp infirmaries. That's Monday, March 15th. The last Forest Avenue High School will be January 11th. They're all Mondays. Get that on your calendar. And the last Monday will be May 10th, the historic role of Temple Emmanuel in Texas, and Jerry Crystal, author of A Light in the Prairie, will talk about that, and she has her book. So we have some really very impressive local authors this year. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Nancy Lubar, our program chairman. Thanks, Nancy.
Stanley Ely's parents came to this country from Russia and Romania, and they came through Galveston. They settled in Dallas on Grand Avenue, had Florence and Jerome, and then Stanley, who was born in Baylor Hospital. They lived on Grand Avenue until Stanley was almost 8 years old, when they moved to Stanhope Avenue in University Park, where he entered 3rd grade at Bradfield Elementary. He continued to go to Sunday school at the old Sheriff Israel building in South Dallas. They had a chartered bus that would go to Highland Park Shopping Village to pick up the children. In 1945, he was bar mitzvahed in South Dallas at Sheriff Israel. He has a surprise story. He's going to tell you about that. He then went on to Highland Park High School. When I read his book, I was astonished to discover that he did something I did at age 16, and since none of my relatives are in this room, I want to see if any of the others of you did it. He secretly drove to Fort Worth. Anyone else? I thought I was the only one, but he got caught. He got a $12 ticket. He spent his freshman year at SMU and then went off to Northwestern University, where he majored in Spanish, got his degree in 1953, went on to serve in Korea with the U.S. Army for 2 years. After that, he spent a year at the American Institute for Foreign Trade in Phoenix and then moved to New York. His first job was as an account executive for an advertising agency, Young and Rubicam. His second job was with Dorothy Gray, which was an international drug and cosmetic firm. Stanley began volunteering as a Spanish tutor to a high school student and found he loved it so much that he enrolled at Hunter College, where he, in 1972, received a master's degree in education in Spanish. He became a Spanish and later a French teacher at the high school in New Rochelle, where he served for over 2 decades. His book, In Jewish Texas, a family memoir, is his very first book. I want you to notice when you go buy the book, and I know you will, that he chose a Texas publisher for this book. Stanley has now lived in New York for 4 decades, but he still calls Dallas home and comes here every Passover. May I introduce to you Stanley Ely.
She's left me little to say. The badge is because I was in Austin over the weekend at the Texas Book Fair. And I feel less guilty about promoting my book because George Bush was promoting his, too. Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. There are a lot of connections between me and some of you. Ruth Andrus's husband, Dave, and my brother, Jerome, were great friends for many years. Bernard Levy and my brother, Jerome, were great friends. I've been away a long time, but there is always a pull back to Texas. The book is called In Jewish Texas, and it is about Jewish Texas, but it's also a fair amount about Jewish not Texas and about not Jewish not Texas, because I've been away a while. And by the way, there's a wonderful additional coincidence, which is that Jerry Crystal's book and my book were both published by Texas Christian University Press. And I hope, I sincerely mean this, I hope you will patronize the books of that press, because I think it's extraordinarily ecumenical of them to have, in 1 year, published 2 Jewish-themed books. By the way, I didn't choose them, they sort of chose me. They were the only ones that wanted the book, to tell you the truth. I sent TCU a bundle of photos, and naturally I left out all the dysfunctional ones. So the pictures make us look like the sort of Jewish family of the year, and the book belies that to a fair degree. I would like to read you a little bit. I don't like to invite people to things and then bore them for an hour with reading, but I do want to read you two sections, beginning with the introduction, which is called Back to Texas. We're beginning our descent into DFW, the pilot advises, and the weather in Dallas is 78 and severely sunny. Traversing the skies from New York City, my 6-foot frame has been confined to the side of a lady of pronounced dimensions. in the near 250-pound range. I just don't know how a fat person would ever fit into one of these chairs, announced the woman as she shimmied into the aisle seat. She settled in. I smiled and was sent hugging the window. 3.5 hours later, debarking into a severely sunny Texas day sounds very nice. For me, it's a visit back from my adopted state to my birthplace, the land where almost a century ago, my mother's family, the Shapiros, emigrated from Russia, and my father's family, the Elys, more likely Eliaviches, arrived from Romania. They were two families who avoided Ellis Island in New York, the traditional destination for European Jews. Instead, they both headed to Houston for a welcome from cousins already transplanted from the old country. Years later, Jerome, my older brother, moved from Texas to Connecticut. My older sister, Florence, to Colorado. They both married and had children. I remained the unmarried gay son, but soon followed their lead of breaking away from the South. But not my parents. They gave no thought to deserting their new home. With the family name shortened, they built a Jewish nest, planting Texas roots, letting them spread. Till I was 17, finished with high school and a year at Southern Methodist, I was a full-time Texan too. That makes more than 40 years since I relocated north. Even so, when I return as I do this spring, I find myself telling friends that I'm going home for Passover. Jewish Texans, more numerous than most non-Texas Jews realize, managed to create an unusual merger of the ambition and independence of Jews with the bravado of Texans. My father, who had to cross nothing less than an ocean to become a Texan, demonstrated his ambition and independence by passing up a lucrative partnership with his brothers and going to work for himself. That self-determination never included leaving Texas, however. Henry leaves New York to the New Yorkers, my mother stated accurately. Or take Uncle Morris, mother's baby brother, now 89 years old. He showed his ambition and independent streak by marrying a wonderful but Gentile lady, and furthermore increasing his capital with periods of gambling. Yet his devotion to Dallas sports teams and nature is total. Gleefully, he escorts me out to the small patio behind his apartment. Look, Stanley, he says, red roses, yellow roses, roses in October. That's Texas for you. Well, okay, that is Texas. Rebecca, my mother, was the eldest of 5 children, and she and her little sisters Fanny and Pearl Shapiro fled with their mother from Minsk around the turn of the century. They went to catch up with my grandfather, who was among the priestly set, and therefore had neither experience nor fondness for work. He had already left for Houston to join the cousins Leon, regrettably much poorer than he thought and hoped. All of them were escaping the pogroms of Eastern Europe, where Jewish children and adults were systematically accused of and punished for crimes committed by others. My Aunt Fanny, who died in the spring of 1996 at around age 97, they were never sure exactly when they were born, remembered looking out the window of her grandparents' house in Minsk when she was 5, seeing Russian soldiers at night moving trucks loaded with the bodies of Jews they had murdered. My mother died in 1987, a dozen years after the death of my father. Jerome, my brother, died an early death at age 38 in 1963. And my sister Florence passed away in 1992, just before her 70th birthday. That has left me the sole living member of our immediate family, and one of the few in an extended family. It has made the Shearith Israel Jewish Cemetery an important destination when I go to Dallas. During that spring visit following the airplane ride with the southern-sounding lady, I made my usual long drive back to the old part of town to visit my dead folks. It's a place I like, shady and solitary, where I can amble among the graves of my family, and those are parents of friend after friend I knew when I was young. At the top of a marble tablet is the name of Solomon Shlomo Ely, my father's father, for whom I was named. He's buried there alongside his wife Esther, Bubba Ely, and not far from the Shapiros, my other grandparents, plus Aunt Pearl and Aunt Fanny's first and second husbands, and recently Aunt Fanny too, plus my own parents. To imagine all those people being so neighborly is a stretch, much as it is to reach the Sheriff Isle Cemetery, located in what was for Jews their first Texas neighborhood, but is now an old and shunned part of town. I still see those people as I meander around the grounds. My mother's card-playing girlfriends, my father's shyster competitors in the insurance business. They're there, more silent than it seems as if they should be. Until I left Dallas, I had only one non-Jewish friend, Tom Wilkinson. But of Jews, there were plenty, and most of those at whose homes we gathered are now laid to rest in those grounds. Mr. and Mrs. J looked like immigrants and never lost their old world accents, but they made a fortune and presented their daughter Emily with a convertible for high school graduation. There's Mr. T, my friend Jean's dad, who everyone thought was mafia. Parties at Jean's were the only times we could rely on access to a liquor cabinet. The decades between then and now have seen me go away and finish college, survive a couple of mandatory years in the Army, gravitate to New York, take jobs in advertising and teaching, reach 6 feet, and replace trying to add pounds with trying not to. They've seen me hesitantly reverse the roles I played during the first couple of decades of my life, emerging less Jewish and more gay. As a 1940s adolescent, then teenager, I was a dependable, if unenthusiastic, bar mitzvah and confirmation student, and then a fervent attendee at a parade of Jewish Sweet 16 dances. To the world, and somehow helplessly even to myself, I played straight. Even as in the privacy of my bedroom, I sneaked looks at the muscle magazines I had wrapped up and brought home. But if for me there was no internal gay liberation, there wasn't much external either. The late 1940s were the all-time period of conformity, when a teenager in my school risked being jumped if seen in anything other than white socks and penny loafers. In the selection of a hero, there was no competition between a high school journalist and football player, whose masculine stance and presumed heterosexuality was a given. A boy who differed from others either tried faking the standard mold or courageously suffered the jabs that came his way. I was of the former. In that old crowd there must have been one or two others with the same affinities as me, but since I can't think of who they might have been, I conclude that they were fakers as well. It wasn't total fakery, however. I clung to that Jewish group as a necessary prelude to the long process of shedding my denial and coming out as a gay man, an evolution that barely started until I was in my mid-20s and went on for years thereafter. Those teenage parties worked for me because there was dancing, but there was no sex, and there was acceptance. Today, the process of change is about complete. As I walk around the cemetery and see the stone marking the graves of Mr. and Mrs. J, I remember that growing up, my friends and I called them the older folks, or as it's unflatteringly said in Yiddish, the Altecockers. Now, an unwelcome revelation, a young person could say the same about me. I approach the cemetery knowing I must delay no longer to make peace. Armed with flowers, I give a brief greeting to Aunt Pearl and Aunt Fanny, women I greatly loved. But at the graves of my mother and father, the central players in my life, I schedule a long stop. I deliver to them news of their grandchildren, the offspring, Florence and Jerome, and now a quartet of great-grandchildren. They stop expecting news of my children, resigned to the idea that I didn't contribute any. That done, I impart whatever rises to the surface, anger, love, apologies, or all those. I mostly seek, even vocally ask for, a release from the tangled, continuing feelings of affection and regret that they, my parents, evoke. That requires attention. Giving it my best, I look up momentarily and discover that there's company. With a full-face stare from the branch of a live oak tree, a red-headed bird is intruding on my visit. What an orchestra seat on mortality that fellow has had. Imagine the number of funerals he has attended right here, the private moments he's witnessed uninvited, the laughs he's gotten out of folks like me who were babies of the family and who have come to try facing the fact that they ceased to be kids long since. After an hour or so, I run dry on news and even anger for Mother and Dad. Well, I'll be back soon, I tell them, and decide I must go. I follow tradition and leave a pebble on their gravestone. Heading toward the gate, my throat still tight, I turn back and see that the winged creature isn't the least moved. He simply chirps, lifts off for a 10-second circular trip, settles back on his branch, and does a carefree reprise of his song. In the cemetery plot where my parents are buried, a couple of unused spaces remain. They belong to our family, and now, I suppose, to me. My father paid for them decades ago. Regardless of my mixed feelings about family or all the years away, one of those spots is where I've decided I want to end up. I'm not sure why, since there's no temptation to call that state home again. Not now, and not soon if I can help it, but one day, back in severely sunny Dallas, where I started, back next to my folks, and the handsome white marble stone that marks their place, and back with that bird. So, I say with a skeptical glance at the redhead resting in the tree, so long for a while, you'll be seeing me again. That's the introduction. The next part is shorter. Pardon me? Got to read the book. For a young boy, Jewish manhood may be scheduled for the 13th birthday, but it doesn't really get going until his bar mitzvah Saturday when he mounts the pulpit with somber stride. Wearing yarmulke and tallis, he participates in the tradition. He delivers blessings to thank God for giving Jews the Torah and recites a Haftorah, or reading from the prophets. Doing so in a soprano voice is forgivable as long as the errors are few. The date for my bar mitzvah was chosen in the established way, the Saturday closest to my 13th birthday on the Jewish calendar. I undertook study of the Haftorah that corresponded to that date. It would be hard for the average and even above average kid to manage the task alone. I was assigned a coach, Mr. Aronoff, a teacher in the old South Dallas Hebrew School. Though the big day wouldn't take place until the end of October, I started in early spring to take the bus to Park Row a couple of afternoons a week for sessions with Mr. Aronoff. I liked Mr. A 5'8", 50-ish gentleman with a black jacket that was too small, a gray and grizzly beard and head of hair, and a kindly smile. Going back across town to the Hebrew school, not the synagogue, was strange. Had I not still been so young, I would have seemed like returning to a former life. One afternoon, when I could finally see being equal to the Haftorah, Mr. A greeted me with an especially mournful look. Shlomi, he said, coming to the door and inviting me politely into a chair, I have to tell you something. You do? I asked unnecessarily. His expression and the tone of his voice suggested that the news was not likely to be good. Then to the suspiciously familiar Shlomi instead of Shlomo. You've done a very nice job, Shlomi. Thank you, sir, I said, figuring that was not the news. He paused, then he coughed. We assigned you the wrong Haftorah. I almost slid off the chair. The wrong Haftorah? After all these weeks, how could that be? I can't tell you how sorry I am, Shlomi, he added, nearly in tears. You're sorry, I thought. Whoever converted the date of your birthday, well, they came up with the wrong day in October. We just discovered it. We need to move your bar mitzvah up a week. I was speechless and probably looking. You don't want to be bar mitzvahed on the wrong day. It might be okay with me passing my mind, though I didn't dare to give that voice. Mr. Aronoff promised to double up on the lessons, more trips to South Dallas, because when the news sunk in, I realized that the new Haftorah, unaided by the old one, would have to be learned with great speed. The corrected date for my bar mitzvah was only 6 weeks away. Various alternatives went through my head. Let me, for instance, have the bar mitzvah on the new day with the Haftorah I had already practiced. No more than 2 people in the synagogue would know the difference. Finally, of course, and given little choice, I did the moral thing and learned a new reading. On the fateful morning, I resisted the temptation to announce that if the congregation wanted me to, I could save them the trouble of coming back the following week and read them the prophet's message from that week too. With my Gentile friend Tommy's memory of long ago events, he says that before he and his mother entered Sheretz Israel for the ceremony, he remembers hearing the chanting that seemed as foreign to him as jungle tom-toms. Relieved to see my father stationed at the door, he was handed a yarmulke, but also an unexpectedly stern look. Obviously, says Tom, I had no understanding of the seriousness of the occasion, a fact I'm surprised to hear, since I must certainly have complained about the doubling of the Haftorah. So, Shlomo Eli mounted the Sheretz Israel pulpit on October 20, 1945, to do honor to my parents and Mr. Aronoff, and with considerable trepidation opened the door into manhood. The hardbound copy of the Holy Scriptures that the synagogue presented to me that day sits still in my bookshelves. But I must have been too nervous to remember that any more of the day than the fact that after that Saturday, I exercised my newly won status to assign Hebrew school to a part of my past. To engage in a discussion with you if you would like, or questions. Someone in another reading asked me why I wrote this book. That's an inevitable question that offers fear. I wrote the book because it was a challenge, actually. I was moving toward age 65. I'd never published a book. I know a lot of people who have in New York. My family was largely gone, and I wanted to see if I could do it. Also, memoirs are very popular nowadays, as no doubt you know. Frank McCourt was in Austin over the weekend. He wrote a magnificent book called Angel's Ashes. You should read it if you haven't. He had a host of people waiting to have him sign their books. Frank McCourt and I spoke to him. We had breakfast in the governor's mansion, by the way. It's nice house. The food was good, and Mrs. Bush was charming. I said to him, I said, you know, Mr. McCourt, you had an advantage. You had incredible poverty. If any of you read his book, I mean, he had poverty that was beyond description, absolutely beyond description. How he survived is miraculous. But he had built-in drama. I didn't. My family was largely white bread. You know, there was, you know, no alcoholism, almost no incest. None of that stuff that makes a good book. So then you gotta find a way to tell a story that has some drama and some fun and some liveliness. And so that was a challenge too. And by the way, it's been a wonderfully interesting experience for me. Publishing a book these days is not easy. The publishers tend to go to the 1% of writers, or the 1% of writers, and give a hard time to everybody else. It was really TCU who, as I said, found me. I found out, though, a number of things that were unexpected. Number one, you have to be very candid when you write a book like this. Friends of mine who've read the book said, my gosh, you really were so frank in there. I said, well, that was my guiding light. I didn't know how else to write it, you know. And with that goes the risk of offending people. It's inevitable. It's just inevitable. And some people take it fine, and some people don't. And I think you have to accept that that's sort of part of the bargain. And when people have criticized me for that, I have said, my only defense is, and I think it is true, that the person whom I make the most fun of in the book is me. There's something else that I realized, and it is that we who write memoirs profit from the shortcomings of others. If you grow up in a wonderful, healthy, happy, beautiful family, you don't have much of a book. It's all the shortcomings that give material for books. Sometimes misfortunes. Certainly in Frank McCourt's case, the poverty that his family endured, they didn't ask for it. It was a misfortune. But we do profit from those things that are not great. And it's not very noble to say that or to realize it, but it's true. It's true. A story with no conflict isn't much of a story. Anyway, I answered my own question.
The colony of growing up getting with a Eli in Dallas in the 40s and the 50s?
That was Ruth Anderson's title, by the way. I don't know. I didn't partake of it.
Do you find that you gravitate towards Texans in New York?
So Texans?
Yes, do you find that you seek out people
That's
who
an
are
interesting question. I'm told that there are a lot, and I think quite a few in the theater. As it happens, I haven't met that many. I don't know very many native New Yorkers, though. Most people are from somewhere else.
Explain the forbidden Fort Worth story. The trip.
Oh. But you're supposed to read the book. just after I got my driver's license, I was barely 16. I'm looking at my friend Myrna, who was part of that same crowd. We went to lots of dances and parties together. She's a great friend. I don't know. I don't know who was in the car, but there were 3 or 4 other kids. I said to my father, can I use the car? Okay, well, don't waste any gas, he said. Certainly not, So we got in the car, and I don't know whose idea it was. It's too long ago. But I think it was probably my idea. We drove to Fort Worth. In those days, Fort Worth was where you went for barbecue and to sort of really, the dregs. And Highland Park played football there once in a while. Otherwise, you didn't go to Fort Worth. So we went to Fort Worth, and I was a kid who had just gotten his driver's license. I was showing off, and I accelerated the car, and guess who was right behind me? A cop, right? And he saw my Dallas license plate. So, so he pulled us over, and he just sort of, real macho Fort Worth cop sauntered up the car, and I don't know, I said something about I had to get home for my father's birthday, and he said, well, here's a gift you can take him, and he his ticket. And I was a very, very goody boy, and I was so terrified of having to show that ticket to my parents that I put it in my desk drawer, and at that point, you'll read about it in the book, I was sharing a bedroom with my Uncle Morris, the one who's now not 89 years old. And after a couple of days, I sort of said, listen, I have a problem, And I think he really thought, or possibly hoped, that I'd gotten someone pregnant. And I said, I have a ticket. And he said, and I said, well, it's from Fort Worth. And I said, and the folks don't know about it. And he said, don't worry about it, I'll take care of it. By the way, I still stay with him now. He's a remarkable 89-year-old. And by the way, also, one second, my mother, there is, I think, a very touching part of this book. My mother, when she was about 9 years old in Houston, made friends with a lady named Rose, who was her age. Rose married a fellow named Joe Keeper, and it was a very appropriate name because Rose Keeper kept letters of my mother for 6 decades. And one year when I was in Dallas, it was in the mid-'80s, my mother was in her mid-'80s then, maybe later, maybe close to 90. And I happened to have been there on a visit, and the mailman brought this big clothing box with the postmark from Houston. And I opened it, and out spilled dozens and dozens of letters, starting from the time that Rose was single, 2-cent stamps, faded ink, paper falling apart. And I said to my mother, "You are not going to believe what just came." I said, "Letters from Rose Keeper." She said, "Oh, I haven't written Rose Keeper in years." I said, "But you did in 1912. And the letters, because my mother was the sort of woman who never looked back. She really almost had a phobia about the past. She hated looking back. She remembered nothing about Russia, which infuriated me because I wanted to know about it. She had a great gift for looking to the future, always. And these letters started when my mother was like 14. Had to quit school, had to go to work, had to help take care of 4 younger siblings. And for me, it was an amazing window on a part of my mother's life that I had never known, because she didn't like to talk about that, you know. And she talks about going to the dentist, and she says, if my teeth weren't so terrible, maybe I would, you know, boys would find me cute. And then she talks about, she complains about the only boys she ever meets are these silly fellows, you know. And she's determined that she's going to be an old maid. And I mean, I'm reading this letter to a woman, you know, who's 85 years old and a widow already. So and there's a whole chapter on the letters. Anything else? Hi.
Have you always taught too?
No. I taught. No, before I taught, I was in advertising in New York, and it didn't work out. And I went into teaching, and I left teaching about 7 or 8 years ago, and really went back to what I started to do way back in Highland Park, which was to write. Myrna, hi.
Before I answer my question, I want to tell you your mother was a wonderful woman.
She was fairly special.
She was special.
Some of you knew.
Yeah.
She was. By the way, let me interrupt you one second. My mother's name was Rebecca, so she was called Becky, and my uncle Sam Eli also married a Becky, so there were 2 Becky Elis. My mother was like that, and my Aunt Becky was like this. And somebody got the idea of calling them Big Becky and Little Becky. And my mother hated that. And was stuck with it all her life.
I was going to ask you about your memories of high school, because we were at Highland Park High School together, and in those years, he wore blue socks with yellow socks doing trouble. Everybody wore white socks and saddles and loafers. And anybody that was different, you were in deep trouble. And how do you look back on the years in Highland Park? Were you in pain? Did you have...
I was a lot in denial. I was not in pain, no. No, high school was wonderful for me.
Well, for me too.
It was wonderful for me. I knew Myrna, I knew any number of other people. We had a terrific crowd. And as I said in the introduction, and I talk more about it later in the book, this was a wonderful piece of security for me. You know, we were very close. I think we were all a little naive and spoiled, but we were certainly harmless. And it was fine. It was very good. I think along the way there was a voice inside of me that said, "You really need to get away." And I went away to college. I went to Northwestern. And Pauline Pierce Revere, who's sitting in the back, was my sort of girlfriend then, and she went to Northwestern for a weekend and I take credit for having her meet her husband when she got there. At that time I had graduated. So no, high school was fine. You know, I have to. I'll be very frank with you all. The other day, I've been doing this sort of tour, but before I went away last week, I was here for a few days, and I went to Foley's, I need some pajamas, and I walked down the sidewalk in Preston Center. And in the window of a shop, there were two posters from Highland Park High School. One was a poster of the football team, and one's a poster of the wrestling team. There was not one non-white face, not one Hispanic face, not one black face, not one Asian face, not one. And I have to say, there's something I find repulsive about that. And I may be offending some of you in the audience, and so I'm sorry, but I profoundly feel that way. That's not the real world today. It just isn't. Highland Park was a wonderful school when I was there, and when Myrna was there, and when our friends were there. But I think it's way out of touch today. I hope there are some black kids there who are not on the wrestling team. Yes, sir.
How did you handle your 2 years as a citizen?
Well, there's
And before you do that, you still did service as a campus.
Well, I have very fond memories in Northwestern.
But how did you handle
The service, I was in Korea, and when I was in Korea, there were no dependents. It was a totally male society. It was very odd in a way, and I think that's perhaps the answer to your question.
I had a comment about this Highland Park School. I just happened to be in federal court downtown Dallas when a Harvard graduate, black attorney was speaking. There was always debate. All the white people wanted to avoid the bus, and they didn't want the white kids bused. He grew up in Highland Park, so he was bused 34 years ago. But who cared? It wasn't white kids.
You're saying he was bused out of him?
Yeah, right. There was no school for black kids in Highland Park.
They went to, the kids that I lived in University Park. My 3 children went to the school and graduated from Highland Park. I do know that there were servants who lived in the so-called servant houses. This was back in the 40s. And they sometimes had children who were school age. Those children were sent, there was an arrangement, they were sent to a black school. This was segregated at the time.
Yeah, but it isn't anymore.
No, I know, but on the eve, interestingly enough, on the eve of, in the 1960s, my youngest daughter, I was the Girl Scout leader for her troop, and we had a meeting at the house with the girls and their mothers. I remember saying something about maybe we ought to move to the kids. We ought to move to another house, and one of the mothers piped up, "Oh, don't leave Highland Park. You'll have your children going with a lot of." Well, I don't want to use
Well,
the word.
let's not get on to that, because we'll spend the whole evening talking about it. But
I think there was a
I'm afraid I got off the subject a little bit.
I think there was a very specific feeling about it, and I think it's still there. Yes.
Man,
My husband and I both live on Stanley.
that's where we live.
No, that's where we live now.
Do you remember the number?
Yes, 4401. Corner of Armstrong.
Hey,
Yes,
you
ma'am.
talked about
I can't hear you.
the gentleman who taught you your bar mitzvah, his name again?
Well, I think his name was Aronov, but I may have made it up. Yes, sir.
Actually, we have a slightly Highland Park related question. Growing up in Dallas in the 70s and 80s, You know, I'm surprised to hear that there were 2 Jewish people at Highland Park. How Jewish was Highland Park when you were there?
Myrna, what do you say? Alyssa, what do you say? We were talking about Highland Park.
Relatively, I mean, there were 242 in our graduating class, which was younger than yours. And there had to be 10 or 15 Jewish kids, and this is at a time when some people still lived in South Dallas. Some of the Jewish community still lives in South Dallas, although most of them had migrated to Highland Park, to the Park Cities. And there weren't nearly as many people in Dallas. It was a city of about
My recollection may
300
be
or
wrong, but
400.
it seems to me there were about 15, maybe 30, 40.
Yeah, but the Jewish population of Dallas is actually 10%, so it was the same in Highland Park.
Anyway, let's not talk about Highland Park. They don't need our publicity. Any other questions?
Do you think that Dallas, do you agree that it's come an awful long way since, I mean, I left in the 70s because I thought it was so provincial. And I was raised and I thought it was provincial. And I thought it was racist and I thought it was anti-Semitic. And I mean, growing up here, that's what I encountered. And anti-Kennedy election. A friend of mine me and her got beat up at Arthur Kramer for wearing Kennedy buttons. And we were all 8 or 9 years old, you know, and...
I'll tell you, normally when I come here, I come on such a brief visit that my universe doesn't expand very much. I go back to see a couple of friends, I spend time with family, and I don't get the chance to perceive all the many changes that have happened in Dallas. But I would like to say this. Over the weekend, I was at the book festival in Boston, and I was overwhelmed, frankly. It was so fun. People told me that Austin is the book city of Texas. I'm not quite sure why that needs to be, but that's what I heard. And that the festival, aside from the Bushes being there and the Capitol and so on, that such a festival really couldn't take place anywhere else. But in any case, it was there. And they had a lot of tents set up outside for selling books. All the publishing houses were there. They had many panels in the Capitol building, which is gorgeous, as I'm sure you must know. It's spectacular. And I was amazed at the number of people who were there. And yes, Frank McCourt was there selling Angela's Ashes, but there were a lot of sort of wannabes like me trying to push our books. And a lot of people buying them. You know, it was a reading public that was there. And Saturday was a wretched rainy day, and there were still a lot of people there. It was very impressive to me. And some really good panels, and some really good people were there. So, you know, it was nice. It was nice. Because sometimes when I come to Texas, all I see are traffic jams and big houses. And I know that's not fair. You know, I know it's not fair. But a brief visit, that's what happens. Ruthie. Yeah, there was a chap yesterday in Austin who, Texas Christian University books are distributed by Texas A&M Press. And I was talking to their sales manager, A&M Press sales manager, and he said, when you drive back to Dallas, stop in Salado, which I would call Salado, Salado, Texas, and be sure you go to the Fletcher bookstore, because Tyler Fletcher has a wonderful collection of books. All right, okay. So he says you can't miss it. It's, you know, an hour out of Austin. Some of you know Salado? Well, that's amazing. So I golfed around and I found Tyler Fletcher. But before I found him, I drove through this long main street with all kinds of antique stores and nice-looking places and bookshops, and it was amazing. And so I met this chap who was wonderfully welcoming, and he has, if you do go there, do call on Tyler Fletcher, because he has a fabulous bookstore with the most original selection of books, and including my book. And I said, how did you get my book? I mean, it seems so unlikely to me that, you know, my book would find itself in this little town. He said, well, the A&M salesman who I was speaking to in Austin came around, and he said, I like books like this. And he said, as a matter of fact, the Texas Jewish Historical Association had a tour, and they came right here. And I said, you're kidding. And he welcomed them, and he showed them books and talked about them and so on. Yeah, it was very interesting. Right.
Was there a lot of, did you experience a lot of culture shock when you went to Northwestern? I'm a Northwestern grad myself.
Really?
I'm from Chicago originally. I just moved down to back. So I'm curious to hear what your experience was. Did you have Texas withdrawal or?
I write a lot about that in the book. I was, no, but I'm happy to answer your question. No, because it was a very important period for me. I went to Northwestern, never having seen the campus, never having been. I wanted to study journalism, and in fact, I ended up not studying journalism, but I went anyway. And I had my heart set on joining one of the two Jewish fraternities. I had passed up the year at SMU, joining the one that my brother had gone to, because there was no branch at Northwestern. And I had scoped out what the two were, and I decided I would certainly be invited to join the more snobbish of the two. And guess what? I wasn't invited to join either one. And it was a crisis. It was a real crisis. I described this in the book. I almost turned around and came home. And thank goodness I didn't, because I met, well, I mean, I lived in a house with a wonderfully eclectic group of guys and made friends, some of whom I have still today, you know, and this is more than 40 years later. So yes, it was a period of adjustment, but it was wonderful.
Did they still have a quota system at Northwestern at that time?
Pauline, do you know?
I don't know about that. I do know that Stanley, that when I went up to see Stanley in my sophomore year of college, Stanley was the king of that dormitory, and it was a big dormitory. It was much larger than any fraternity house, and he was the president of the house. And he was the king of the hill, so I don't think that he could have done any better with any fraternity. I can assure you.
The thing is that I think the fraternity system at Northwestern, you want to address that yourself, in those days was very powerful. And part of the reason was that it provided housing for a lot of people. There was a limit of other housing. But they were very inbred. And had I joined one of those Jewish fraternities, my life would have been so utterly different. I would have missed meeting all kinds of. For example, in Sergeant Hall, place that Pauline is referring to, there were a number of black students. Possibly there was a black quota. A friend of mine said there was a Jewish quota. I was never sure whether there was.
There was.
But I had never gone to school with a black kid. Never. I didn't know that black people did anything except wash cars. I didn't know it. And it was not prejudice. It was ignorance. It was plain, simple ignorance. And I must tell you that the black kids who were at Northwestern were incredibly great. They were so much more sophisticated than I was. And it was quite eye-opening. Were you in a fraternity there?
No.
Hi.
Did you get involved in politics at all in New York in any way? In the broad sense of your politics?
I'm involved with gay politics to some extent.
Yeah.
I've been on the board of directors of a lesbian and gay health clinic for a decade now It's a marvelous place. It gives low-cost care to many young people who do not have their own physicians or who are timid about going to their own physicians. We're perpetually raising money because we're perpetually needing the money. We just recently moved to our own building for the first time with that great expense. It's a wonderful place. I believe very deeply in that. We turn in Manhattan. I live in Manhattan. We turn away no one, and as a matter of fact, we now have a rather inexpensive women's program, outstanding in the country, really. Mammography, radiology for lesbians, who very often, and I must say I've been educated to this myself, very often do not get adequate health care. Many gay women do not go to doctors because they're afraid to talk about who they are and so on. That's sort of been my major commitment.
Can you sort of give us an overview of how you got some of this? You knew a lot of this personally, but some of the historical information, how you got your photographs, how do you develop that?
In the book?
Yeah.
The photographs I stole from albums, from aunts and uncles, cousins, anywhere I could find them. They used a lot of photos, they really did, and they're really nice. The rest, more or less, was from my own recollections. I invented a few things. I had some conversations that took place before I was born, so I wasn't there. But, writers do that. And one of this book actually started out, it ended up differently from the way it started out. It started out with me not in it at all. It was to be a family story. My parents were both immigrants. They roughed it. They really roughed it, and they were part of a generation that is really history today. I talk about this in here. People didn't work for large corporations, and they went to work for themselves. And families established their niches. The chefs in the dairy business, and the leaders in the plumbing business, and so on. And it seemed to be almost an understood, an unwritten rule that if so-and-so had captured that particular market, nobody else. Am I right, Bernard, or not? But I mean, there was this idea of working for yourself. Murder's father, what was in, right, and so on. I have such an admiration for that because my father was one of four brothers, and his brothers all banded together to form the Ely Company, which went into the wholesale leather goods and clocks and tie racks and so on. And my father was, as I am really, more of a renegade, I guess, more independent. He did not go with them, but he ultimately went still in business for himself. I mean, that's what people did, And so I try in the book to portray the corresponding development of Dallas as a city and Dallas as a Jewish community in more or less the first half of the century. And that was how the book really started out. That was going to be the book, plus personal stories about aunts and uncles and so on. And the editors said, you got to talk more about yourself. That a reader will feel cheated if you're not in the book more. So, for better or for worse, I'm in there. Listen, you all are a wonderful audience, but I think you must be tired by now, right? Yes, ma'am.
I just want to ask one question to satisfy myself. Were you related to Frida Ely?
Yes.
When I first came to Dallas, it was in 1941, but then when the war started, Frida's father drove her and me every Saturday night to the Baker Hotel so we could help entertain for the U.S. That's
Boy, I should have talked to you.
That's not remembering the freedom.
That's a very-
I think they moved to Atlanta.
That's correct. That's a lovely remembering.
Was your father's name Henry?
Yes.
I guess he had an insurance policy with my family because every year of my life until I was probably 22, I got a birthday card from Henry Ely.
There's one. Yes.
What are you working on now?
Well, I'm trying to write a novel. I do a lot of articles anyway. I am trying to write a novel, and I've sort of written something that a friend of mine is looking at. I don't know whether it's any good or not. I don't want to talk about it because talk about it, you don't do it.
You
Yes.
said that CCU found you. Do you want to tell us how they found you? And
Well, no, I'm
published
sorry.
your book?
I said that incorrectly. I canvassed a lot of publishers, and they were the ones that were the most receptive to what I was trying to write, and that's how it went. They've been very nice to work with. Do please support them. They're very ecumenical. Thank you very much for coming.